Nexus Station orbited the neutral moon of Kepler 442c like a metallic spiderweb stretched across the void, its diplomatic chambers buzzing with the sort of interspecies tension that made seasoned ambassadors reach for their antacids. The architects had designed these halls to accommodate beings ranging from the microscopic Zephyrian collective consciousness to the towering crystalline hegemony representatives, though nobody had quite solved the atmospheric requirements problem. The result was a carefully controlled environment that left everyone mildly uncomfortable, which, according to Galactic diplomatic theory, was the ideal state for productive negotiations. The Korthak delegation dominated the eastern wing, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming under the artificial lighting. Each warrior diplomat stood roughly 3 meters tall, with mandibles that could crush titanium, and a cultural obsession with proving their physical superiority at every available opportunity. They flexed constantly, as if the universe might forget their impressive muscle density if they paused for more than 30 seconds. Across the hall, the Vorthan contingent maintained their characteristic stoic posture, their scaled hides rippling with barely contained power. Evolution had gifted them with redundant cardiovascular systems and bone density that made their skeletons suitable for construction materials. They spoke in low, rumbling tones about the various ways they could theoretically dismantle the station's superstructure, using only their bare claws, though they assured everyone this was merely friendly conversation. The ethereal collective had positioned themselves near the viewport, their translucent forms shimmering with an inner light that supposedly indicated deep philosophical contemplation, but more likely suggested they were running complex calculations about how many lesser species they could subjugate before lunch. Their representative possessed the unsettling ability to phase through solid matter, which made security screenings awkward and bathroom breaks mysteriously efficient. Into this carefully orchestrated display of galactic machismo walked humanity's diplomatic representative, and the collective response could best be described as politely underwhelmed. She stood approximately 1.7 meters in height, possessed the typical human arrangement of limbs and organs, and carried herself with the sort of quiet confidence that most species mistook for adorable delusion. Her skin lacked protective scaling, her bones appeared reasonably fragile, and her musculature suggested she might struggle with opening particularly stubborn containers. The Korthak ambassador clicked his mandibles in what passed for amusement among his people. "Fascinating," he rumbled, voice carrying the undertones of barely suppressed violence that made Korthak poetry so popular among teenage rebels. "The famous humans have sent this." "We were expecting something more impressive," added the Vorthan representative, his words creating small vibrations in the station's hull plating. The stories of human military prowess must have been greatly exaggerated in translation. The ethereal collective spokesperson merely tilted her luminescent head, though whether this indicated curiosity or pity remained diplomatically ambiguous. "How quaint. We had prepared extensive defensive protocols based on intelligence reports, but clearly such precautions were unnecessary." The human diplomat smiled with the sort of patient expression typically reserved for explaining basic concepts to particularly slow children. She had heard variations of this conversation approximately 47 times since humanity's introduction to galactic society, and her responses had evolved from diplomatic platitudes to a refined art form of polite indifference. "I'm sure you have," she replied, settling into the specially designed human-scale chair that looked embarrassingly like furniture from a children's playroom when surrounded by the massive alien accommodations. "Though I noticed none of your intelligence reports mentioned why humans consistently rank among the galaxy's most effective peacekeeping forces." The Korthak delegate's exoskeleton rattled with what his species considered laughter. "Peacekeeping through paperwork, perhaps. Your people lack the physical capabilities for real military applications." "Indeed," agreed the Vorthan, whose idea of subtle intimidation involved slowly extending and retracting his claws while speaking. "We have reviewed your species' biological parameters. Impressive innovation, certainly, but ultimately limited by your compact design." The negotiations proceeded with the predictable rhythm of interstellar diplomacy, which resembled an elaborate dance performed by beings who had never heard music and weren't entirely sure what dancing involved. Trade agreements were proposed, rejected, counter-proposed, and buried under layers of bureaucratic complexity that made quantum physics seem refreshingly straightforward. Throughout these discussions, the alien delegations continued their casual assessments of human military value, which consistently ranked somewhere between negligible and theoretical. The Korthak representative shared amusing anecdotes about human soldiers he had observed during joint training exercises, emphasizing their adorable attempts to keep pace with properly evolved warriors. The Vorthans contributed technical analyses of human equipment, noting with professional courtesy that the engineering was quite clever for a species operating under such obvious biological constraints. The human diplomat nodded politely at these observations, occasionally making notes on her data pad with the sort of methodical patience that suggested she was either documenting everything for future reference or composing particularly creative shopping lists. The session's tone shifted when the Korthak ambassador announced the afternoon's military demonstration, a traditional display of allied capabilities designed to showcase each species' contribution to galactic defense initiatives. This was, essentially, a sophisticated measuring contest dressed up in diplomatic protocol, but nobody mentioned this directly, because galactic civilization had not yet evolved beyond the need for elaborate face-saving mechanisms. "We've arranged for a comprehensive exhibition," the Korthak declared, his mandibles clicking with anticipation. "Each delegation will demonstrate their species' martial capabilities using standardized equipment provided by the station's military wing." The Vortan representative's tail swished with barely contained excitement. "Our warriors are prepared to show the true meaning of physical superiority." Perhaps the human representative would prefer to observe from a safe distance. The ethereal collective's delegate flickered with what might have been amusement. "The demonstration will feature our latest acquisition, a Hegemony-class battle tank recently decommissioned from active service. 30 tons of armored destruction, perfect for showcasing proper military applications." The human diplomat glanced up from her notes with mild interest. "A battle tank? How wonderfully nostalgic. I haven't seen one of those in actual use for quite some time." A casual dismissal in her tone created a moment of confused silence, as if the universe had briefly forgotten how to process sarcasm, delivered with such perfect sincerity. The alien delegates exchanged glances that suggested they were beginning to suspect something, though they remained unclear about what exactly they should be suspecting. The Korthak ambassador recovered first, his exoskeleton clattering with renewed confidence. "Yes, well, perhaps after observing proper warriors in action, humanity might reconsider its approach to military applications." "Perhaps," the human agreed, her smile carrying just enough ambiguity to suggest that reconsideration might involve more than the aliens had bargained for. The station's military demonstration bay resembled a gladiatorial arena designed by committee, which explained why it managed to be simultaneously impressive and completely impractical. Banks of observation galleries ringed the central floor, while holographic displays projected real-time biometric data that nobody actually needed, but everyone pretended to find essential. The architects had installed atmospheric processors capable of supporting 14 different respiratory requirements simultaneously, creating an environmental cocktail that smelled vaguely of ozone, methane, and the sort of artificial fresheners used in low-budget hotels. The Korthak delegation had arrived early, naturally, because punctuality was apparently another battlefield where they needed to establish dominance. Their warriors moved through elaborate warm-up routines that involved impressive displays of carapace flexibility and mandible coordination. Each exercise seemed designed less for actual preparation and more for the psychological warfare value of watching alien observers mentally calculate exactly how many pieces they could be torn into. "Behold," announced the Korthak military attaché, gesturing towards his assembled warriors with the pride of a parent displaying particularly violent children. 2 centuries of selective breeding, gravitational conditioning, and combat enhancement procedures. Each warrior possesses the strength to lift 7 times their body weight and the reflexes to dodge projectiles traveling at supersonic velocities. The demonstration began with a series of strength trials that would have impressed anyone unfamiliar with basic physics. Korthak warriors hefted massive steel beams, crushed reinforced containers into decorative sculptures, and performed acrobatic maneuvers that defied several laws governing vertebrate anatomy. Their exoskeletons gleamed under the artificial lighting as servo-assisted muscles rippled with mechanical precision. The Vorthan contingent watched with the sort of polite attention reserved for amateur performances, occasionally offering appreciative grunts that fooled nobody. When their turn arrived, they approached the demonstration area with the measured confidence of professionals, correcting enthusiastic amateurs. "Strength without technique is merely destructive potential," rumbled the Vorthan combat specialist, whose scarred hide suggested extensive familiarity with both concepts. "Observe the application of proper biomechanical principles." What followed was essentially a masterclass in applied violence, delivered with the clinical precision of a university lecture. Vorthan warriors moved through combat sequences that combined raw power with sophisticated tactical thinking. their redundant cardiovascular systems allowing for sustained performance that left the monitoring equipment struggling to keep pace. They demolished practice targets with calculated efficiency, demonstrating how superior evolutionary design could transform brute force into elegant destruction. The ethereal collective materialized near the demonstration floor with their characteristic disregard for conventional physics, their translucent forms shimmering with barely contained energy. Their approach to military demonstration differed significantly from the brute force exhibitions preceding them. Physical strength is a primitive concept, observed their military theorist, voice carrying the sort of condescending patience typically reserved for explaining advanced mathematics to particularly slow students. True power lies in the manipulation of fundamental forces. The demonstration involved phasing through solid barriers, manipulating electromagnetic fields to disable electronic systems, and casually rearranging matter at the molecular level. The monitoring equipment registered energy readings that made the station's engineers nervous, while the ethereal warriors performed feats that suggested the laws of physics were more like polite suggestions. Throughout these exhibitions, the human diplomat maintained her position in the observation gallery, occasionally making notes with the methodical attention of someone documenting interesting but ultimately irrelevant phenomena. Her biometric readings remained remarkably stable, suggesting either impressive emotional control or a fundamental lack of appreciation for the deadly capabilities being demonstrated below. The centerpiece of the afternoon's festivities stood in the bay's center like a metallic monument to military engineering excess. The Hegemony-class battle tank represented the sort of collaborative project that occurred when 3 different species tried to design the ultimate armored vehicle without consulting each other about basic concepts like efficiency or practicality. 30 tons of composite armor plating surrounded a fusion reactor that could power a small city, while weapon systems capable of reducing mountains to interesting geological formations protruded from every conceivable angle. The vehicle possessed artificial intelligence sophisticated enough to compose poetry about its own destructive capabilities, though military regulations prevented it from actually doing so during formal demonstrations. "Magnificent," breathed the Korthak ambassador, his mandibles clicking with mechanical appreciation. "A proper weapon for proper warriors." The Vorthan delegate nodded approvingly. "The engineering specifications are impressive. Capable of traversing any terrain, engaging multiple target types, and surviving direct orbital bombardment." The ethereal representative flickered with what might have been professional interest. "The power core integration demonstrates sophisticated understanding of energy manipulation principles. Quite advanced for a collaborative effort." The human diplomat glanced up from her notes with mild curiosity. "Interesting design philosophy, though I noticed they prioritized firepower over mobility optimization." This observation created another of those awkward conversational pauses that seemed to follow the humans' comments like faithful pets. The alien delegates exchanged glances that suggested they were beginning to recognize a pattern, though none seemed entirely sure what pattern they were recognizing. The Korthak military attaché recovered first, his exoskeleton rattling with renewed confidence. "Mobility is irrelevant when your weapons can eliminate threats at interplanetary distances. This vehicle represents the pinnacle of military engineering." "The specifications are certainly impressive," the human agreed, her tone carrying just enough diplomatic neutrality to avoid outright contradiction, while implying absolutely nothing about actual agreement. The demonstration continued, with each species showcasing their interaction with the massive vehicle. Korthak warriors swarmed over its surface, demonstrating their ability to conduct maintenance and repairs under combat conditions. Their chitinous fingers manipulated complex mechanical systems with practiced efficiency, while their enhanced reflexes allowed them to navigate the tank's intricate interior spaces without triggering safety protocols. Thornton specialists approached the vehicle's technical systems with characteristic methodical precision. Their scaled hands interfaced with control surfaces designed for multiple species compatibility, while their redundant nervous systems processed tactical information at speeds that made the tank's artificial intelligence seem sluggish by comparison. They demonstrated weapon system operations with a sort of casual competence that made mass destruction look remarkably mundane. The ethereal collective's interaction with the battle tank transcended conventional mechanical interfaces entirely. Their energy-based physiology allowed direct integration with the vehicle's electronic systems, creating a hybrid consciousness that operated with supernatural efficiency. They demonstrated tactical scenarios that pushed the tank's capabilities to theoretical limits, their translucent forms flickering in perfect synchronization with the vehicle's computational cycles. Throughout these exhibitions, monitoring systems recorded performance metrics that would have impressed military analysts throughout the galaxy. Strength ratings, reaction times, Tactical efficiency ratings and technical integration scores all registered at levels that confirmed each species' reputation for military excellence. The human diplomat observed these demonstrations with a sort of polite attention typically reserved for moderately interesting documentary programs, occasionally nodding when particularly impressive feats were achieved, but otherwise maintaining an expression of diplomatic neutrality that revealed absolutely nothing about her actual thoughts. As the formal demonstrations concluded, the alien delegates gathered near the battle tank with the satisfied air of professionals who had successfully proven points that nobody had actually disputed. Their warriors withdrew to respectful distances, leaving the massive vehicle dominating the demonstration floor like a metallic elephant that everyone was trying very hard not to mention. Perhaps, suggested the Korthak ambassador, his tone carrying just enough challenge to maintain diplomatic deniability, the human representative would care to demonstrate her species' military capabilities. The invitation hung in the air with all the subtlety of a tactical nuclear weapon, while the assembled delegates waited to see how humanity's seemingly fragile representative would navigate this particular diplomatic minefield. The human diplomat regarded the challenge with the sort of thoughtful expression typically associated with contemplating lunch options, rather than responding to thinly veiled military provocations. Her pause stretched just long enough to create the uncomfortable silence that preceded either diplomatic breakthroughs or intergalactic incidents, though the assembled delegates remained optimistic about which direction this particular moment might lean. "How thoughtful," she replied finally, her tone carrying the diplomatic equivalent of a loaded weapon wrapped in gift paper. Though I should mention that human military demonstrations tend to be somewhat different from traditional approaches. The Korthak ambassador's mandibles clicked with anticipation. "Different how precisely?" "We prefer practical applications over theatrical displays," she explained, rising from her observation chair with the measured grace of someone who had performed this particular routine many times before. Less impressive visually, perhaps, but considerably more efficient in actual field conditions. This response created another of those conversational vacuum pockets that seem to follow human statements like gravitational anomalies. The alien delegates processed her words with the sort of careful attention typically reserved for deciphering ancient prophecies or tax documentation, neither of which had prepared them for whatever was about to unfold. The demonstration began smoothly enough, with the human representative approaching the battle tank's control systems with the same methodical confidence she had displayed throughout the diplomatic proceedings. Her fingers moved across interface panels designed for multiple species compatibility, while monitoring systems dutifully recorded her vital signs and performance metrics for later analysis by beings who would spend considerable time questioning the accuracy of their instruments. She navigated the tank's interior with economical movements that suggested familiarity with cramped spaces and complex machinery, though her technique differed markedly from the elaborate martial displays that had preceded her performance. Where Korthak warriors had demonstrated strength through aggressive manipulation of mechanical systems, the humans simply operated controls with quiet efficiency. Where Vorthan specialists had showcased their enhanced reflexes through rapid-fire tactical sequences, she maintained steady, deliberate inputs that produced optimal results without unnecessary flourishes. The ethereal collector's representative flickered with what might have been professional curiosity, as the human interfaced with the tank's electronic systems through conventional manual controls, rather than the direct neural integration that their species preferred. The approach seemed primitive by comparison, yet somehow achieved equivalent results through pure technical competence. "Adequate," murmured the Vorthan delegate, though his tone suggested he was struggling to understand why adequate felt somehow more unsettling than impressive. The complications began when the demonstration shifted to mobility trials, specifically the complex maneuvers designed to showcase each species' ability to position the massive vehicle under varying tactical conditions. The battle tank, which had performed flawlessly during previous demonstrations, suddenly developed what the station's technical staff diplomatically termed positioning difficulties. The massive vehicle's repulsor systems, which utilized controlled gravitational manipulation to achieve movement despite the tank's considerable mass, began experiencing fluctuations that left it effectively immobilized in the center of the demonstration floor. Diagnostic systems registered normal operational parameters, yet the 30-ton machine refused to respond to movement commands from any of the standard control interfaces. "Technical difficulties," announced the station's military coordinator, his voice carrying the sort of forced optimism typically associated with announcing delayed spacecraft departures. The vehicle's mobility systems appeared to be experiencing temporary calibration issues. The Korthak military attaché approached the immobilized tank with the determined expression of someone preparing to solve problems through aggressive application of physical force. His warriors swarmed over the vehicle's exterior, their enhanced strength allowing them to apply leverage that would have impressed construction equipment. They pushed, pulled, lifted, and generally attempted to intimidate the machine into cooperation through sheer biomechanical intimidation. The battle tank remained perfectly stationary, as if it had developed philosophical objections to the concept of movement. The Vorten specialists replaced the Quarter team with characteristic efficiency, their approach emphasizing technical precision over brute force applications. They interfaced directly with the tank's control systems, ran comprehensive diagnostic routines, and attempted to manually override the positioning difficulties through sophisticated understanding of gravitational manipulation principles. The vehicle continued its passive resistance with a sort of mechanical stubbornness that suggested it had achieved consciousness, and decided to express political opinions. Perhaps, suggested the Ethereal Collective's military theorist, a more advanced approach would prove effective. Their warriors phased directly into the tank's interior systems, their energy-based physiology allowing interaction with electronic components at the quantum level. They manipulated electromagnetic fields, adjusted molecular structures, and generally applied the sort of fundamental force manipulation that made conventional physics textbooks obsolete. On the flip side, the battle tank maintained its position with implacable determination, apparently immune to both conventional engineering and reality-bending alien technology. The situation was rapidly evolving from minor technical difficulty to major diplomatic embarrassment. The afternoon's carefully orchestrated demonstration of military capabilities was stalling on a mobility issue that should have been resolved by any competent maintenance technician. Yet 3 of the galaxy's most advanced species had failed to budge a single armored vehicle. Tension levels in the observation galleries climbed as delegates began calculating the political implications of a failed military demonstration. Trade negotiations that had seemed straightforward suddenly acquired additional complexity, while reputation management specialists started composing explanatory statements that would minimize the diplomatic fallout from what was essentially a very expensive mechanical breakdown. The human diplomat observed these escalating difficulties with the same patient attention she had applied to earlier proceedings, occasionally glancing at her chronometer with a sort of mild concern typically associated with potentially missing scheduled appointments. Her biometric readings remained frustratingly stable, suggesting either remarkable emotional control or complete disconnection from the unfolding crisis. Interesting, she commented finally, her voice cutting through the increasingly frantic technical discussions surrounding the immobilized tank. May I suggest a different approach? The question created immediate silence, as if the universe had paused to consider whether this particular plot development made any logical sense. The alien delegates turned toward the human representative with expressions that combined desperate hope with profound skepticism, their military reputations hanging in the balance of whatever solution she might propose. The problem appears to be positioning rather than mechanical failure, she continued, approaching the battle tank with the same methodical confidence that had characterized her entire performance. Perhaps a more direct approach would prove effective. The Korthak ambassador's exoskeleton rattled with nervous energy. Direct how, precisely? Our warriors applied maximum physical force without achieving any measurable result. Physical force is certainly one approach, the human agreed, circling the immobilized vehicle with the sort of casual assessment typically applied to minor household obstacles. Though sometimes efficiency matters more than raw power application. She paused beside the tank's front section, studying the massive vehicle with the expression of someone solving a particularly interesting puzzle. Her hands tested various surface points along the armored hull, apparently searching for optimal grip positions despite the obvious impossibility of achieving manual manipulation of a 30-ton military vehicle. The assembled delegates watched with the sort of fascinated horror typically reserved for observing traffic accidents or political campaigns, unable to look away despite their growing certainty that they were about to witness either a miracle or a spectacular failure that would provide entertainment value for decades to come. The human representative positioned herself beside the battle tank's front corner, assumed a posture that suggested she was preparing to attempt something that violated several fundamental principles of physics, and placed her hands against the armored surface with the confident grip of someone who had performed this particular maneuver before. This should only take a moment, she announced, her tone carrying the same casual assurance she might use to mention adjusting furniture placement or rearranging minor decorative items. What happened next would later be described by xenobiologists as physically impossible, by military analysts as strategically significant, and by the Korthak ambassador as requiring immediate alcohol consumption. The human representative, all 1.7 meters and seemingly fragile 70 kilograms of her, simply reached down and lifted the 30-ton battle tank, Not pushed, not leveraged, not manipulated through clever mechanical advantage. Left dead, the massive armored vehicle rose from the demonstration floor as if it had suddenly discovered anti-gravity, though the actual explanation involved nothing more exotic than human bone density, muscle efficiency, and evolutionary adaptation to a gravity well that made most inhabited worlds feel like vacation resorts. She adjusted her grip with the casual precision of someone rearranging furniture, rotated the tank 90 degrees to improve its tactical positioning, and gently set it down with the sort of careful attention typically reserved for handling delicate antiques. The silence that followed possessed the quality of a diplomatic incident achieving critical mass. Monitoring equipment registered biometric readings that suggested several delegates were experiencing species-specific versions of cardiac episodes, while the station's artificial intelligence began running probability calculations that kept returning error messages. "There," the human announced with satisfaction, brushing imaginary dust from her hands. "Much better positioning for your tactical scenarios." The Korthak ambassador's mandibles hung open in a configuration that his species' etiquette manuals specifically warned against during formal diplomatic proceedings. His warriors had collectively forgotten how to operate their respiratory systems, creating a series of mechanical wheezings that sounded like industrial equipment experiencing catastrophic failure. "Please," he managed finally, "is not possible." "Oh, it's quite possible," the human replied with the patience of someone explaining basic concepts to gifted children. "Though I understand the confusion, most species evolved on worlds with reasonable gravitational conditions." The Vorthan delegate's scaled hide had shifted to colors that indicated severe psychological distress. "The mass-to-strength ratio calculations are completely wrong. Your species cannot generate sufficient force to overcome gravitational resistance on an object of that magnitude." "Cannot?" The human's eyebrows rose with polite inquiry. "I'm afraid your calculations may need adjustment. Earth's gravitational field runs approximately 1.7 times galactic standard, which tends to produce interesting adaptations in skeletal density and muscle fiber efficiency." The ethereal collective's representative flickered through several spectrum ranges before settling on a color that roughly translated to existential crises. "The energy expenditure alone should have caused immediate physiological collapse. Our sensors detected no significant metabolic stress indicators." "Well, no," the human agreed reasonably. "It wasn't particularly strenuous. Though I appreciate your concern for my well-being." The implications began cascading through the diplomatic assembly like quantum entanglement effects spreading through hyperspace. If humanity's seemingly fragile representative could casually manipulate 30 tons of armored destruction, what exactly were human military capabilities? Those adorable soldiers the Korthak had observed during joint exercises suddenly required complete tactical reassessment. The clever engineering that Vorthan analysts had dismissed as compensation for biological limitations now appeared to be creative applications of ridiculous baseline strength. The trade negotiations, which had been proceeding under assumptions of human military insignificance, suddenly demanded complete recalibration. Technology transfer agreements that had seemed generous now looked potentially suicidal. Defense pacts that had been offered as charitable assistance to a fragile species now appeared to be invitations for humanity to provide galactic civilization with a comprehensive education in applied physics. The human diplomat settled back into her observation chair with the satisfied expression of someone who had successfully concluded a productive afternoon's work. "I believe that completes the demonstration requirements. Shall we return to the treaty negotiations?" The alien delegates exchanged glances that carried approximately 17 different levels of "what have we gotten ourselves into," while their military advisors began frantically recalculating everything they thought they knew about human capabilities. Perhaps, reflected the universe's sense of irony, it was time for galactic civilization to learn that in a cosmos full of physically impressive species, the most dangerous beings were often the ones who looked like they couldn't hurt a fly, especially when that fly happened to weigh 30 tons and carried enough firepower to sterilize continents. The afternoon's lesson was elegantly simple. Never judge a species by its size, particularly when that species evolved on a world that considered crushing gravitational force to be standard atmospheric pressure.